Digital seems ephemeral, but it's impacting millions of workers, whether they know it or not. It includes back office and call center and other workers whose jobs could be digitally offshored. It's workers whose jobs are controlled or managed by software like Amanda was talking about, including retail and restaurant scheduling apps. It's workers like teachers that are rated and even fired by algorithmic management. It's warehouse and delivery workers prodded to work faster by productivity apps. Low-paid gig workers that toil for platform companies, and it's workers everywhere that are monitored on and off the job by their employers. These workers are all impacted by big tech companies and digitally enabled employers. And the digital trade rules give all the power and all the rights to the companies that control these technologies and data. So what are the emerging digital trade issues and the potential trade provisions, and how do they impact workers? These digital trade rules are new. The internet, email, and smartphones didn't exist when NAFTA and the WTO were debated. We fax stuff to one another. Digital trade rules first appeared in the TPP and the USMCA. These provisions grant companies almost unfettered rights to control and transfer data, software operation, and digitally enabled workers across borders. Many provisions directly impact workers, including around data, software security, privacy, cybersecurity, and reducing customs scrutiny for smaller e-commerce shipments that can conceal evasion of forced labor or anti-dumping orders. There are also issues affecting workers off the job. The rules make it harder to implement consumer protections or expand internet access, and they lock in platform immunity for allowing online hate and political disinformation. There's some customs and trade facilitation stuff around electronic signatures and banning tariffs on digital trade. TPP was the first multilateral deal with a digital chapter that included big tech's wish list. The language was a starting point for USMCA and the US-Japan digital deal, but the USMCA language includes even more giveaways to the tech companies. There are other digital trade negotiations underway, including ongoing digital and data discussions with the UK and the EU, and digital trade is included in the Indo-Pacific Economic Partnership. The draft framework includes a range of digital issues with right now just sort of happy language and no specifics. But using the USMCA as a digital starting point would only expand anti-worker provisions to repressive countries with widespread labor abuses, where companies have already offshored tens of thousands of back office call center and data jobs. Digital trade rules can block efforts to address the impact of emerging technologies on workers. Look, trade disputes allow tribunals to weaken or even eliminate common sense laws. Domestic measures must be deemed necessary and legitimate, minimally trade restrictive, and they can't be perceived to be intentionally protectionist. Few policies survive trade attacks. More than 95% of WTO challenges to domestic measures have been successful, and USTR has identified other countries' digital regulations as potentially illegal trade barriers, including on privacy and on ride-hail rules. The rigged trade rules constrain all domestic policy, but they pose a unique challenge to confronting emerging technologies. Not only does digital trade language grant broad powers to corporations, but right now there are almost no laws protecting workers or consumers from the excess of big tech. Efforts to enact new technology policies could be easily derailed by trade disputes. So what's at stake for the companies? They're pushing for strong digital trade language to protect the right to digitally offshore and exploit their workers and secure broad rights over their future digital policy to maximize their profits. Over the past 5 years, profits at just 4 tech companies, Apple, Amazon, Facebook, and Google, have more than tripled to nearly $250 billion. Profits of these firms jumped $125 billion during the pandemic, while working people struggled just to keep their heads above water. And it's not just the companies. Investors and executives have been richly rewarded. The stock value of these 4 firms surged 400% by the start of 2022. And even after the market meltdown, these stocks are still worth many times what they were valued in 2015, about 5 times higher at Amazon and Apple. And these companies aren't alone. The Forbes billionaire list has over 120 US tech billionaires with a combined net worth of over $1.3 trillion. The accumulation of wealth at the top is widening the economic and racial divide. Amazon CEO grabbed $36 million in 2020. 1,200 times more than the typical worker's $29,000 annual earnings. The digital trade rules threaten to lock in that yawning gulf between tech billionaires and working families. There are basically three buckets of digital trade impact on workers. First, threatening jobs and workers. Second, making it harder to enforce current labor law. And third, making it harder to address emerging technologies that threaten workers. The digital trade language prevents governments from blocking or curbing cross-border data flows, including personal information. It also blocks companies from requiring data processing or storage facilities be maintained domestically. This is known as localization policies. The prohibition against policies that set conditions on cross-border data transfers or require domestically held data could be challenged as illegal trade barriers. Efforts to protect sensitive personal information, health records, biometric data, financial information, or even keep data on critical infrastructure or law enforcement on shore could be challenged. The USMCA excluded financial data from the digital chapter because Treasury wanted to be able to enforce money laundering and tax evasion laws. But these provisions also facilitate offshoring. The tech companies pretend the data and localization provisions promote internet freedom and stand up to authoritarian governments, but it's really about offshoring. After all, many of these companies already cooperate with China and Russia, and a 2021 Facebook study highlighted the offshoring benefits as a key rationale for the data provisions. Moving the data means moving any digitally enabled jobs, including data processing and call centers and telemedicine. Tens of thousands of unionized call center and data processing jobs have already been offshored to digital sweatshops with pittance wages and non-existent worker protections. And important public data services like veterans' health records have been privatized. Policies to safeguard sensitive data and secure critical sectors could protect consumers, the US economy, and jobs, but would be illegal trade barriers. Much of the digital offshoring is going to IPEF countries with appalling records of labor abuses. The International Trade Union Confederation counts 7 IPEF countries as amongst the most hostile to workers and labor rights. Malaysia, Thailand, and Vietnam have significant forced labor and human trafficking problems, and child labor is persistent in India and Indonesia. Thailand, Korea, and the Philippines have arrested union leaders, and extrajudicial killing of labor activists are common in the Philippines. India and the Philippines are home to thousands of digitally offshored back office and call center workers, and these two countries host an army of exploited ghost workers. These are the workers who tag, code, and enter data that's the backbone of artificial intelligence. The digital trade deals make it easier to offshore workers and harder to protect workers from labor abuses. Digital trade rules also make it harder to investigate and enforce how algorithmic management and artificial intelligence can violate wage and hour, workplace safety, employment discrimination, and other laws. Employers use bossware to hire, rate, monitor, and control workers. These algorithmic management tools are secret and unaccountable. They're black box systems that have real impacts on workers. Digital trade rules limit government oversight of bossware tools that can make it harder to enforce labor law. The US and MCA and US-Japan digital provisions guarantee that companies can keep their software secret and prevent governments from accessing or evaluating the source code or algorithm blueprints for how the software operates. The provisions do allow specific investigations, but this specificity requirement creates a hurdle to initiating enforcement efforts. To know what to investigate, you may need to access the technology. And if you don't access the technology, you can't start an investigation. It makes it harder. It also makes it harder to pursue industry-wide evaluations. The USMCA and US-Japan deal didn't include some TPP exemptions, like for critical infrastructure or commercial contracts that could cover union bargaining. And the TPP requires companies to modify software to comply with domestic laws, but USMCA and US-Japan do not. Whether they know it or not, more workers are being monitored and managed by artificial intelligence tools that undermine their rights. A 2021 review found that more than 90% of algorithmic management studies found negative worker impacts, including increased de-skilling, job intensity, and job insecurity. Employers use artificial intelligence tools to screen job applicants, assess video interviews, and even rate and fire workers. Teachers have been disciplined when students did not achieve expected test performance, and many employers evaluate workers' performance in real time. Amazon warehouse workers and UPS drivers have had their task time constantly monitored, and workloads are regularly adjusted upwards. And many employers monitor workers on and off the clock. Big tech companies want digital trade provisions to take a hands-off approach to regulating artificial intelligence. The existing trade language makes it harder to oversee bossware tools and impede labor law enforcement. Just-in-time scheduling software encourages managers to press workers to skip breaks or work off the clock, violating wage and hour laws. Some unionized retail workers lost their health benefits when they were forced to become part-time workers under algorithmic scheduling. And the software is worsening the unreliable schedules and short shifting of retail and restaurant workers that worsens economic and family life precarity. Productivity apps ratchet up work speed that can lead to higher workplace injuries. Amazon warehouse workers are rated on their pick rate that has led to serious injury rates 5 times higher than the national average. And digital monitoring has included snooping on workers' social media accounts to sniff out union sympathies that can lead to anti-union coercion and retaliation. And automated job applicant screening has been rife with discrimination that has made it harder for people of color, women, older people, and people with disabilities to secure jobs. All the trade rules are hostile to even common sense regulations and long-standing regulatory approaches, but the broad corporate digital trade rights are especially risky because there's so little digital oversight of the economy. Gig workers are entirely at the mercy of their secret algorithms. Platform apps assign tasks that determine workers' income and job quality. Many gig jobs set pay rates on surge pricing algorithms, making it impossible to determine whether workers are getting paid fairly or similarly for similar tasks. Tasks are often assigned and paid based on ratings that are also determined by black box algorithms. Ride-hail drivers have challenged these ratings that effectively determine earnings as arbitrary or racially biased. Gig workers, especially ride-hail and delivery drivers, can be disciplined through deactivations for not accepting tasks fast enough, declining ratings, diverging from assigned routes, or other mysterious reasons. The rationale for this deactivation and the time off app is not disclosed to workers, and it can be difficult to resolve these deactivations that impact their earnings. Any effort to regulate this gig work companies could get hung up by digital trade rules that protect source codes and algorithms. Employers are digitally monitoring workers' every task and every movement. Delivery vehicles put cameras on drivers and sensors that detect braking, speed, seatbelt use, drop-off time, and more. Warehouse and other employers monitor task performance and pick rate through use of carried or handheld equipment like scanners. Amazon's Whole Foods purportedly uses thermal imaging to determine where workers are gathering to prevent union organizing. And companies monitor computer use, keystroke, and watch teleworkers through cameras, essentially spying on people's homes. This surveillance contributes to safety problems, undermines the right to form unions, suppresses freedom of speech and assembly, and erodes the right to privacy. There's little or no federal protection from workplace surveillance. The current bipartisan digital privacy bill doesn't include protections for workers, and any federal effort to protect workers from surveillance could be stymied by digital trade provisions. Every mouse click, online purchase, internet search, social media post, smartphone tap is collected and commodified by big tech. The destruction of Roe only brought the lack of online privacy into sharper focus. The existing digital trade language explicitly includes the unlimited right to control and ship personal data across borders. The deals promote voluntary self-regulation and specifically restrict digital privacy measures to those that are necessary and proportionate. Importantly, the language only protects users' personal information, but the users of workplace surveillance are employers, not the workers who are being monitored. USTR views digital privacy measures as potentially illegal trade barriers. It has flagged digital privacy rules in the EU, Switzerland, Canada, as well as IPEF countries, Indonesia, Japan, Vietnam as trade barriers. Digital trade barriers to government oversight of big tech also harm workers off the job. Algorithmic creditworthiness, housing decisions, predictive policing, facial recognition software, and other AI applications disproportionately discriminate against people of color. That just reinforces and perpetuates existing racial inequalities. And algorithms drive the clickbait that's spreading political disinformation and making corners of the internet a racist cesspool. And social media is contributing to a mental health crisis amongst young people. Financial regulators need to understand how algorithmic high-speed stock trading schemes work to enforce market manipulation rules. And the platform companies are monopolist gatekeepers for much of the digital economy. They choose what we see, what we buy, and what we pay. But the digital trade rules constrain policy space and government authority to address the known downsides of the digital economy. We're working to build a worker-centered digital trade vision that can provide robust and defensible policy space to address today's tech problems, as well as emerging issues to ensure governments can step in and protect workers, consumers, and communities. So what do we want? Big tech companies and their corporate allies want to enshrine the unfettered right to control data and workers in digital trade deals and lock in this deregulated Wild West that harms workers, consumers, and communities. The critical demand is to ensure there's a robust policy space to confront the many known digital downsides. This includes protecting critical and sensitive data and workers from offshoring, keeping financial data, medical records, critical infrastructure, and other personal or vulnerable data in the US protects consumers and workers. And digital trade provisions must not curtail the enforcement of current labor laws or prevent new oversight of emerging technological issues that harm workers, like digital surveillance. We should be able to take on the big tech monopoly, protect digital privacy, deal with social media disinformation, and whatever other digital downsides the companies throw at us. The public, including labor unions, not the companies, should decide the rules of the road for big tech in the workplace and society. We're already taking these concerns to the administration and Congress. We want to work with allies and union affiliates to build up a digital trade program informed by the experience of workers, unions, and our allies in civil society.